Hi.
Please stand up.
Hi, my name is Jeanette O'Keefe. I spoke with you, Dick Branson, before we started the study. I was one of the people who actually quoted for it, and fine, great. The study is very sound and everything like that. But my concern is, where do we translate this now into practical application? Now, do we need to consider the participants in this other than...
Just speak into the microphone.
Do we need to consider the participants at the level that possibly where they have to accept change and be told how to do it as part of, in making them as part of the change process? Maybe I haven't explained that really well. Basically, a lot of people that I talk to at grassroots level, I mean, I've worked in the last 5-6 years across Western Australia, New South Wales. I was with GR for 2 or 3 years as the animal health and welfare manager, as well as being on track with that. And one of my greatest concerns with the industry as such is that there are a lot of people out there ready and willing to embrace change, wanting change, working towards change, doing their own thing. But it's come down to a them and us attitude, and we really do need to change that. We need to engage people. So how do we take this document, make it practical and achievable for them at the grassroots level, but allow transition time for it to occur? So have you suggested how to do this in this document at all? I haven't read it completely, I'll admit.
Thanks, Dan. Sure. In terms of our responsibility and the role that GRNSW asked us to play, it hasn't included that next step that you're talking about. We refer to this in the context of the cultural change required in the document, with some recommendations that essentially there's a whole area of expertise in psychology that relates to cultural change. And my background is in dog behaviour, not in human behaviour. And so I acknowledge that it's not my area of expertise. However, we have been extremely impressed by the willingness of the people that we've spoken to be open to new ideas. And there certainly hasn't been, to put it, to stop there, when we first started this project, we were given some red flags of warnings that we might expect to experience some degree of hostility from industry participants. Haven't had an iota of it. We're also very impressed with the GRNSW group that we've been dealing with, and an indication of that was that when we were given the role, there was no information about who the target audience for the report was, so we prepared it for GRNSW. Upon receiving it, they made it publicly available through a media release. So they've taken the first step towards promoting transparency by being transparent. So I think that leadership role is critical in any cultural change, that there has to be leadership that sets an example that people are willing to look up to and follow.
Just to expand that further with regards to it, like you talk about being transparent in that. I mean, I have also put up a model towards the transparency. I started that back in 2013 before I left GR, and nothing more was done of it. Now, I put the same model that's been advanced and developed even further. I don't know if I've sent you a copy of it or not, but it's basically, I've had no feedback whatsoever with it, but it's an integrated system based against the world standard, and basically it requires second and third party auditing, which is what's required, and I assume the UK model would have that as well. I've since yesterday put forward another model which then allows for a national-based system similar on that basis, but more defined to GA. So Scott Parker has currently got that at the moment, so that may be something you want to look at in regards if you're advising further. But the fact is that there needs to be a historical establishment of what's happened in the past to be able to build on the future, and I don't see that in this. and maybe you've got the detail in the raw data there. Are we ever going to get to see that? Like the people you saw, who you went to, the references that you used. So basically, that to me would be complete transparency as to regards how it and probably get more acceptance of it quicker than you would do than just sort of putting it up there like that.
Thank you. Certainly throughout the course of this, in addition to the site visits that we did with a representative cross-section of industry participants, we also had numerous phone conversations, email exchanges. Throughout every stage, we let everybody know that we were willing to have any conversations with people if they felt they had something that we needed to know about or that they wanted to share with us or they felt was significant. We definitely took it on board and incorporated it within the report. We feel that, I understand your point about transparency, but we also felt that in order to get the engagement and honesty that we wanted from participants, that we'd like to protect their anonymity. If they want to let people know that they met with us, that's totally fine, but we feel that's probably not fair to disclose that. And we're so appreciative of their openness and willingness to let us walk through their properties and see how they do things and talk to us about their practices. And as Nick said, we had not an iota of hostility. Everybody was so happy to show us around and talk to us and be really frank and honest as well about their current, past, future practices. And I really think that to say who we visited and who we've spoken to would not help the strength of the report. I think the information that we would gain from all those sources is represented within the report.
Yeah, I get that.
Excuse me, we just got to go on to other questions. We do have to move on. I'm sorry, you've made a good valid point.
This lady up the back, thank you.
Hi, I'm Pat Carissa. I'm on the direct list, have been a member of the WDA for 40 years. I'm sorry, we came in late and I didn't read your survey you had on the computer because it wouldn't open up. And number one, firstly, there are a lot of people that would have liked to have read that survey. This is from people that don't have computers. I'm sending this to you. The reason I would like to speak to you is to ask a question, and I don't know whether you're the right lady or not, whether I'm on the right thing, so you'll have to excuse me if I'm not. If you're the lady that states that the working dog, farm dog, is the same as a greyhound, I'm sorry, I have to differ with you and so a lot of other people that I'm here on behalf of. We've had greyhounds for 40 years, and I cannot class them, maybe feed-wise, yes, but with some of the things you want to bring into practice, no. Now, we've bred greyhounds for 40 years, and we've always started our pups off. Am I on the right thing or not? Oh. We've always started our pups as soon as they have their eyes open. They'll have little balls of knitted balls of wool, knitted balls, or toys to play with when they're in with their mum. And as they graduate to get a little larger, we give them toys to play with. And some of the things that have been said, I think, is wrong, but that's how I feel and a lot of others. And I've come down especially to voice that opinion. And I'm sorry if you disagree with me, but you're entitled to your opinion, and I'm entitled to mine. But I just feel some of the things aren't right. You need to speak to a few more of us that have had greyhounds for such a long time. We can only haven't only had them here in Australia. We've also, our parents and relations had them in the UK, so we have got some good idea of what we're talking about. But I really do believe that you should be speaking with people like myself and other people. They're sports dogs. They are not working dogs. Now, I've seen farm dogs on farms on chains. Those dogs are not looked after, and also working dogs, not all of them are looked after. The show working dogs and the others, they are because you see them in the shows and they're winning prizes. But our greyhounds are not working dogs, and we don't leave them chained up in the back of a ute. They are looked after, well looked after, and if you could come to my home, you would see how well looked after they are, and to many more of us greyhound people probably sitting here today. But that's what I would like to say. The greyhound is definitely not a working dog. It's a sports dog. I would hate to think what the horse people would think if we called their race horses working horses. That's what I have to say. Thank you very much.
And we'll come back to finish it up to this gentleman here about the housing the dogs in kennels or yards.
Thank you for that. I was going to ask you.
I'll come back to that.
I'd just like to thank you for standing up and saying that. I'm not aware of any point in time where I've said that farm dogs are the same as racing greyhounds. I may have said yesterday, I think I perhaps drew an analogy between when we were asked about the behavioural tendency of greyhounds to chase, and was there any other similarity with other working dog contexts. And I may have referred in that conversation to the farm dogs that are sent out to heading out to paddocks and then bringing back sheep and using that chase reflex but training it. That is probably the closest I can think of in recent history that I've ever said anything like that. I appreciate they are a different performance animal, but I'm not sure if you caught the part of our conversation where I said that although the use for your animals is different in a sporting context and a working context, the fact that you are breeding a dog for a purpose, for a behavioural outcome that you want, whether it's to detect narcotics, whether it's to chase a lure, selecting the dog for the purpose, that process of genetic selection is the same. The rearing for a purpose and how you target that behaviour and how you train a dog for the outcome that we want, those purposes and learning principles are the same. And how we manage things like the nutrition and the exercise physiology is also, there are similarities. Okay, so I don't think we're in disagreement. And I thank you for your comments.
That's all right. Well.
Okay, just on behalf of you, sir, I presume you're asking the question regarding individual kenneling compared to greyhounds multiple in the yard from a training perspective. So on behalf of you, Nick, while I'm standing here, can you just address that very important question?
Did you have a specific question about?
Yeah, the question I've got on the interpretation of what I saw on the screen was that the kenning, let's call it, or caging, whatever you want to use, kenneling of individual dogs in individual kennels is not seen as good practice. And I'm very curious to know how that decision has been made.
Sure. So
Reason.
I'll respond to that from the perspective of the welfare interpretation of that in terms of the impact on the dog, okay, rather than the logistical issues.
Yeah. Fine. Any way you like.
Sure. Yeah. So one of the key things when we're trying to come up with ways of interpreting welfare, whether welfare is good or bad, is to look at giving the animal the opportunity to show you that it's chosen, it's made a choice for a particular outcome. So we talked about this a little bit yesterday, and the comparisons that came up were, or the examples that came up were that if you've got greyhounds in their individual kennels and you leave the door of that kennel open, the question that will answer whether or not the dog prefers to be by itself or in a group with others is whether over an extended period of time with the doors open, whether those dogs will go back into their own run or whether they'll go into a run with another dog. There will be individual variation just by virtue of the fact that you can compare it with some people. Some people go and live in the bush by themselves because they don't like to associate with other people, but that's a choice that they've made. Other people like to live in a closed gated community with lots of people around all the time. So the distinction is not whether all dogs want to be with other dogs or whether they want to be by themselves, but whether the dog has the opportunity to choose.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
All right, we are running out of a little bit of time in our first section. I'll come over to the back for Mickey Player.
Thanks, Ross. So, in your vet clinic, all the cages are open, are they, so the dogs can go wherever they like? Fair thing. Look, I've got nothing against you people. I know you've been given a lot of our prize money to do a job. 75,000 is the figure I got. All through this presentation, all I've seen is not enough research, needs more research, you know. As far as kenneling goes, if we put 2 dogs in a kennel, we'd have to muzzle them 24 hours a day. There's a welfare issue just there. And everyone in this room knows it's not practical, you know. It's okay for you to say, you know, this is how we do it, and we've got them chasing rubber balls and all this other bullshit. You know, these dogs are trained to chase a lure, not a rubber ball, and you've got to understand that. I haven't got my glasses. You compare them with athletes. Athletes don't chase a lure, you know. These dogs are bred, they're born, they're reared for one purpose, and that's to chase a lure. And chasing a ball, when you say, you know, the animal doesn't need to be chasing anything with animal products on it, that's fine. Every dog will chase a ball, but they won't chase it as hard if they know they're going to get a better reward. And, you know, this is great. We've had a few problems in the industry. We had a few idiots that did the wrong thing. It's all over now. No one's talking about it. It's not in the papers, not on TV. We don't need industry restructure. We get rid of those people. We do what's got to be done with them, put them out for life or fine them or whatever, and let's get on with it. We don't need all this. Thank you.
All right, we're starting to wind up on time. Did you want to respond to that, or you?
Thanks. There was lots of things that you addressed there, and I'll just respond to one, and that relates to what are the risks associated with group housing dogs, and how can those risks be reduced? One thing that's significantly different about greyhounds compared to other dogs is that greyhounds routinely, as part of their normal life, wear muzzles.
Could you just speak up a wee bit? We're
Sure.
a little hard of hearing. We're getting older now.
No worries. Is that a bit better?
Can't hear you.
Is that,
That's much
is that better?
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm a bit shy on the inside.
Don't be shy. We've known you a long time, Mr. Connicky.
Yeah. So a significant difference between greyhounds and other dogs in general is that most other dogs are not used to wearing a muzzle. When a dog's wearing a muzzle, it can't bite. Can't bite people, can't bite other dogs. So a significant risk has already been mitigated by the fact that the greyhounds, are used to wearing a muzzle. So in the context of trying to introduce two unfamiliar dogs, one of the first recommendations that will always be made is to put a muzzle on both the dogs, okay? Because you've eliminated injury, you've eliminated damage between the two dogs. The greyhound industry is already on the front foot with that because the dogs are already wearing a muzzle. So that's the first point to make. The second point is that there are specific occasions called triggers that are most likely to initiate aggression from one dog to another. And they relate to access to resources, okay? So if one dog thinks that it's missing out on something, it's likely to get upset. That upset then can tip over into not a phone call to the solicitor, but a bite, an aggression, okay? So those triggers they're really quite simple and small in number, and they relate to levels of energy, they relate to access to food, and they relate to attention from people. If those things are canvassed up and considered in terms of the strategy that's taken of co-housing greyhounds that can easily have muzzles put on them, because they've probably got muzzles on anyway, then the risks associated with co-housing greyhounds are so much lower than co-housing dogs from other backgrounds. And as I mentioned in the presentation, there's plenty of industries, including the pet dog industry, where dogs get co-housed. Dogs, to start with, don't know each other. Got all of the other working dog industries, and I take your point about the difference between sporting and working dogs, but we tend to just use words indiscriminately just to help to explain concepts. So it's been done before, can be done, is easy to do. And it's done in the UK in the greyhound industry. So.
Okay, just talking about socialisation and in that thing, I read 160 pages over about 3 days. you can't, like in there, it says putting a muzzle on the ground is a welfare issue. So I mean, you say that we should be putting muzzles on them, where it's a welfare issue. And as far as dogs fighting, like the last 3 dogs I put out, 2 off of the dog fights, mate, they just come out, one of them run upside the house, the other one come back, they just stood there and bang, fight. There was nothing, no growl, no nothing, just bang, fight. So what do you do with that? How do you socialise and never do that?
So there will be some additional risk factors with that story that we haven't heard as part of what you've described.
Mate, them dogs have been together for years and years. They kennel next door to each other, and they just come out and went bang, straight into us. There was nothing.
Yep.
There was,
And that, yeah, you're absolutely right that you can't do anything to eliminate that particular instance, but it's very, very rare that that happens.
no, it's not. I mean, that dog 30 years ago, just walking for him, he said the 2 outside ones just come round, bang, fight, street, again, nothing.
We have no ability to predict future behaviour,
Well, that's
whether
like,
it's humans.
You're just saying that, you know, like the welfare issue with muzzles and all that. Like, it's just,
What that point relates to is some of the regulations that are in place that are not at the level of the trainers and the breeders, but that are imposed by the peak bodies relating to compulsory muzzling of greyhounds. So,
in your thing, in your 160 pages, you say it's a welfare issue, put the muzzle on.
yeah, strategic muzzling is really smart and a really good way to go, but it doesn't necessarily mean that greyhounds need to be muzzled 24 hours a day. That's the point.
Okay, so we'll just unfortunately have to just go with one more because we are already behind time on this one.
Yeah,
Sound, is it on? Yes, on there.
yeah. My name's Ken Burnett. I'm part of the Greyhound Industry Participants. What I struggle with the Working Dog Alliance is you've indicated about the dogs you use for narcotics. Obviously, they do special things with those dogs. The attention is currently now on the greyhound industry, what went on with the Four Corners issue. Where's the animal welfare issue with those people, what they're using with those dogs? You know, they're using those dogs to detect narcotics. Obviously, there's a way of doing it. So, you know, there's obviously things going on with working dogs elsewhere that there's no animal welfare issues with what they're doing with their animals, and our industry is under a lot of pressure of the media at the moment, under the public eye, but there's no indication or anything in the news about what they're doing with the narcotic dogs. So
Can I respond to that?
you can respond to that. That's good. Yeah, thank you.
You're right in that narcotics, currency and explosive dogs are all trained using the same methodology. Historically, that may have been used, and I'm talking decades and decades ago,
Yep.
and I'm not sure of this, but may have used what you're implying.
Yep.
Currently, it absolutely doesn't. All the agencies that are involved in narcotics detection are government agencies, and I can assure you we've spent extensive time with Customs and with the Australian Federal Police and with corrective services. Their training protocols are all based around the learning principles of behaviour modification and a canine behaviour-based training system that works on positive reinforcement for the behaviour that's sought after. Whilst they will use either artificial, synthetic product or real product for the dog to search for, the reinforcement that is given to the dog does not relate to that product at all. It's based around play or food reward.
Is that true?
Absolutely, positively, 100% true. I
Very good,
can
thank
assure
you.
you of that.
Well, that means that
Or-
what you're saying is that the animal can be re-educated, because obviously previous they were doing things with narcotics that has probably been outlawed by now, is it?
What they associate for the dog, so what they associate for the dog is you find that smell and
Yep.
you have the best time of your life.
Right.
And so the dog is so motivated, the way that they breed and select their dogs, and there was significant R&D put into the Customs breeding dog program, and their dogs are now basically nationally providing national dogs for all the detection capacities and sought highly overseas as well. Their breeding program's gone from being, 30 dogs a year to 200.
Yep.
Those dogs are selected for those behavioural tendencies and then trained. And if we're talking about things like early rearing practices, they do things like getting the pups playing with toys and food on a conveyor belt that they might be asked to search on later on in life. So they've had a familiarity with that equipment in a way where it's not turned on, but they get familiar with the smell and the sound and climbing all over it. So there's that early familiarisation that sets them up to succeed later on in life. And then they associate, depending on the dog, because the dog determines the reinforcer. So it may be a dog that's highly food motivated. It may be a dog that really wants to tug on a piece of towel wrapped up. And they'll have that as a play reward for the dog. So when it finds that item, it gets to have that reinforcement that it finds most rewarding.
So as you've indicated twice there, but both times you've said by scent, by smell, to make them identify what they're looking for. It's very similar to what we're trying to do with the greyhound industry. Like at the moment, we're trying to get the dogs to chase a mechanical allure. No smell, just noise and sight and sound. So that's what we're trying to do with our animals. Now we appreciate the change that we're trying to do here, but it's still the changing period is going to be very difficult from old practices to new practices. And so at the moment the industry is struggling with change. It is definitely struggling with change, with getting the new way of doing things. As you've indicated, as young dogs rearing, to have activated noises and sounds and smells and things, but we can't use those things like what you're saying. Like we can use synthetic things, but is that enough stimulation for these animals?
Look, when we were out in our visits to industry participants, we saw great practices in place, people using empty feed sacks being dragged along behind a quad bike, getting young dogs chasing. We heard stories about dogs charging across a paddock when a pine cone fell and rolled down a hill. They're obviously very tuned into catching on to that movement and sight stimulus.
Yep.
We saw people who had long-arm danglers, either with a squawker on the end or just a toy that they were getting young pups to, run after a person with it on almost like a fishing rod kind of system, to encourage that chasing of movement. And yeah, I guess that translated then to when we saw trialling tracks with follow-on lures where the dogs could really get onto and mouth, very long-armed, almost tentacle-like attachments on the lure. So I think there's a lot of great practices in place.
Yeah.
And it's, to some degree, we know there are people, we have spoken to many people who have got great ideas and great practices, but that wanting to hold on to the leading edge, their own training tricks, is what kind of stifles that sharing of fantastic knowledge throughout the industry, and that it's a real challenge to overcome.
Yeah, most definitely. I believe that is the biggest challenge that we've got today, is that trying to introduce new practices that people have been used to doing things so differently for so long. It's the hard times that we're going to have to make with the squawkers and things. Like I've got pups now at the moment that I'm using squawkers with, and I throw it in the yard with them and they chase it and things and play around with it. So those things are happening, So we
and
are
I mean,
trying.
As an example, detection dogs, so say quarantine services, for example, where they're looking for plant and animal material coming into the country, and guide dogs, where they're helping stop people crashing into things, a very different context. They're two professional groups that come together on a regular basis to share ideas about how they train their dogs and learn from each other as a professional development activity. So even though the outcomes of the behaviours are very different, one's focusing on scent, one's focusing on being an aid to people, they still find they're able to learn a lot from each other. And we've got a lot of good, working dog industry network participants and people that would be more than happy to chat to people from within the greyhound racing industry about their experiences of translating practices and how they've moved from, what they did 50 years ago to what they do now. And, we'd be happy, we've expressed that to GRNSW as well. We're happy to help set up those connections so that perhaps you can share practices and they can learn from you as well.
Thank you.
What we'll do now, unfortunately, we're just so far behind now, we're just going to have to stop this where we are at the present moment. What I can do, number one, if people have any questions, and Nick and me are here with us at all for lunch, there's certainly, through myself, if you'd like to give me a question, I can get that up to them. Or if you would like to take the time and word or an email or a letter, send it through me as the chairman of GRIG, and GRIG will be meeting with Working Dog Alliance somewhere in the next sort of month or so. We'll try to make that arrangement, and I'll put those thoughts through. I can appreciate everyone has opinions, and we can literally go on here for 24 hours. I can understand that, but at this point, I'd like to thank Nick and Mia very, very much for their time. It's certainly something that we will look to achieve. If you'd like to take a break for 2 seconds, then we'll have Marty Hallinan up here.
Very